Welcome to a candidate forum for Sacramento County Supervisor, District 5. The candidates and moderator for the forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan and active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Although we do not endorse or oppose candidates, we are a political organization. And so we do, after careful study, take positions on ballot measures and legislation with our advocacy arm. You can find our positions on our website. And if you're interested in public policy or just want to support our volunteer work, we invite you to join us. The format for this forum will be as follows. Both speakers will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, and then they'll have 1 minute to answer the questions in rotating order. Finally, speakers will have 1 minute for a closing statement. And the timer is League volunteer Nancy Lapp. And you will see her in the front row. She'll give you 30 seconds left to speak, and then she'll give you the stop sign. There you go. So we will begin now with an opening statement from Pat Hume.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Pat Hume, and I grew up in Elk Grove, South Sacramento County, District 5. Public service is in my blood. My maternal grandfather was on the Elk Grove Unified School District Board of Directors for 20 years. My paternal grandfather was city manager of Chico, California from 1930 to 1950, and my father was a colonel in the Air Force, career officer before his untimely death when I was 5. I've been on the Elk Grove City Council since 2006, winning re-election 3 times. I was on the Planning Commission since incorporation before that, so all told 22 years of public service so far. I was ready to get out of the political arena, however, and I'd announced that that would be my last term because it's grown so caustic, so divisive, and so bloodthirsty. But when Don Natoli announced his retirement, I realized I owe it to my community to try and lead by example and show that we can talk about big issues and try and find big solutions, but when we agree to disagree, we can do so civilly, that it doesn't have to be a death match. My campaign is focused on the issues that matter most and tackling the problems that plague our community by bringing people together to find solutions, not divisive politics. I have the support of the aforementioned retiring supervisor, Don Natoli, as well as the majority of the city councils from the largest cities in the district. I also have the support of our business community, the chambers of commerce and trade association groups, and I am most proud to say I have the support of our law enforcement associations, including the Deputy Sheriff's Association, Sacramento County Probation Association, Elk Grove Police Officers Association, Sacramento Police Officers Association, Sacramento County Association of Law Enforcement, and others, because I recognize that our #1 responsibility to our constituents is to make sure they feel safe going about their daily lives. I look forward to today's discussion, and I hope that I will earn your support. Visit pathume.com to read more about me. Thank you.
Thank you. And now an opening statement from Jacqueline Moreno.
My name is Jacqueline Moreno. I am currently the president of the Cosumnes Community Services District, which governs over parks, rec, fire, and emergency medical services for the cities of Elk Grove and Galt. I was elected to do this work 4 years ago. I'm a mom of 2 kids. I'm a small business owner who works to provide mental health care to kids in schools, originally trained as a school psychologist, and I've been doing that work for 22 years, about as long as I've lived in the Elk Grove community. To me, this race is about values and it's about experience. I believe that this community wants a pro-choice supervisor. I am the pro-choice person in this race. I believe that the community wants someone who will talk about and work to address climate change. With 115-degree temperatures a couple weeks ago, we have fires ravaging through neighboring counties. We need a supervisor who will look at policy through a climate lens. I also believe that this community wants a transparent and accountable leader who will work to make sure that the decision-making process is transparent to the people that they serve. This race is also about experience. 9 years ago, I opened up my own small business. We grew that small business to almost $2 million in revenue in just under 2 years' time and hired 25 people. I know what it's like to run a small business in this community, and I could be that voice on the dais. This race is also about experience in that I am a school psychologist. I've been doing that work on the ground floor for over 20 years. I believe that having a mental health professional on the dais can be instrumental in solving issues like our homelessness crisis. I'm supported by Senator Eggman, Dr. Pan, Assemblymember Cooley, Planned Parenthood, building trades, plumbers and pipe fitters, operating engineers, United Healthcare workers, firefighters, nurses, teachers, and in essence, working families in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our first question, we'll start with you, Jacqueline. This November, voters will decide if the county should tax cannabis dispensaries in unincorporated communities, if they're allowed to operate there. This tax measure is designed to fund county homeless services, and you are both from Elk Grove, where cannabis retail and commercial cultivation are prohibited. So what is your stance on the cannabis tax measure?
I support the cannabis tax measure because I think that it is a tax base that is not being taken advantage of right now by the County of Sacramento. I think that people in the county and the unincorporated areas are using cannabis, and that tax base is going elsewhere at this time. So I do support that measure.
Pat?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the voters weighing in on this. I don't have a position necessarily on cannabis use one way or the other, but when we're talking about increasing a tax, whether it's a user tax or a sales tax, it has to look at the proportionate and equitable way in which it's applied. And so the fact that this is a county-wide tax, which would be applied out into the unincorporated areas as well as within the cities, barring any, as was mentioned, where there's a prohibition of those types of uses. And so whether or not we look at the redistribution of the money that comes in from this tax back into the communities from whence it came.
Pat, state officials brought back the Delta Tunnel plan. It calls for construction of a 45-mile tunnel to divert water from the Sacramento River to communities and farms in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. What is your stance on the Delta Tunnel project?
It's a great question. I've been spending a lot of time down in the Delta. My stance is unwavering. The answer is no. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I am against the tunnels. We do not solve our water issues by putting a larger straw into the same cup of water. We need to identify new water sources. And when we're talking about the amount of water that would be diverted out of the Delta in order to go to Southern California water purveyors, so people are going to be making money off of this water, we're talking about essentially the amount of water flow that's in the American River. So imagine the American River being dry, and that's the water these tunnels would siphon off. It will be terrible for the Delta. It'll be terrible for the communities. It's terrible for the environment, and it's a terrible idea, and I will fight it tooth and nail with every bit I can.
Jacqueline?
I do not support the tunnel in the Delta. I think the community is clear that it will affect not only the environment, but also the livelihood for folks that count on the Delta for recreation and income. If by chance we are not successful with fighting the tunnel, I do believe that the community deserves a strong community benefit agreement that is going to put the community first and put the voices of people in the Delta on a pedestal so that they can talk about their needs. But at this point, no, I do not support the construction of the tunnel.
Jacqueline, the Board of Supervisors approved ordinances that prohibit homeless people from camping at the American River and Dry Creek parkways, as well as camping on flood levees near schools and libraries. Did they make the right move? What more can supervisors do to address the homeless issue?
That's a lot to answer in 1 minute. However, I did not support that ordinance because without a place for people to go, people will just be shifted from one place to another. I am encouraged by the current efforts of the county and the city of Sacramento and the business community to meet and talk about a solution to this issue, but I do believe that more stakeholders need to be involved in the development of a regional housing and service plan. We're spending a lot of money on this issue with very little results, and I want to know why. As supervisor, I will advocate for an internal audit to look at the millions of dollars that are currently being spent on this issue and to align those dollars with a clear plan with goals and objectives.
Pat, did the supervisors make the right move?
Thank you. This is the #1 issue when I talk to voters on their doorstep, and so I assume there are going to be other questions about homelessness in general, so I'm going to answer the question being asked, and I'll say time will tell whether or not it's the right move, but thank God it was a move. We cannot let perfection stand in the way of good, and the reality is that the homelessness epidemic and the impact of encampments has taken over our American River Parkway to its detriment. The number of fires, the number of encampments, the number of pollution and things that's going on over there. So it cannot be used for its intended use by the people who paid to preserve it and have it there. So I commend the Board of Supervisors for at least taking this measure to reestablish control, set a baseline for what's not acceptable, and enforce laws that are already on the books. And then we can start to work on how we build up the wraparound services and change these people's lives for the better.
Thank you. Pat, many have called for a new, broader vision of public safety in our communities. What is your vision?
That's a great question, too. This is the #2 issue that's on the mind of voters as we're out there, is the fact that we're being overrun by crime and criminals right now, and people don't feel safe in their neighborhoods. They don't feel safe using the parks. They don't feel safe going into businesses. Businesses don't feel protected, and they're closing their doors. This was a story that we would read about happening in San Francisco, and now we're seeing it happen in our own city. The #1 responsibility of government is to provide for the common defense and make sure that people feel safe, and we're failing at it right now. That's a problem. And so we need to look at how we can augment the law enforcement, augment the sworn officers with other professionals that are trained to de-escalate and manage situations once the threat of life has been removed. But the reality is people should feel safe putting their children away in their cars, and right now they don't.
Jacqueline?
If people aren't feeling safe in the South County under the leadership of my opponent, I think we need to ask ourselves why. Violent crime is on the rise. Gun violence is on the rise. Sacramento County ranks #1 in the number of hospitalizations due to domestic violence of all 58 counties in our state. People do have a right to feel safe in their communities and in their homes. I believe that if we are asking law enforcement to do their job, we need to make sure they have the tools and resources to do so. But it's also time that we reinvest back into the community by fully funding programs designed to prevent that crime in the first place. We know what data says around funding youth programs. We know what data says around funding education. Those programs work, and it's time we fully fund them.
Jacqueline, District 5 is home to small, unincorporated communities such as Wilton, Walnut Grove, and Cortland. What can the Board of Supervisors do to enhance the quality of life for those towns?
First and foremost, I think it's important for the supervisor to have a presence in that community and to really have a deep understanding about the needs of that community. When I'm there talking to voters, I hear a lot about failed infrastructure, about roads needing repair. And when I'm supervisor, I intend to work with that community to make sure that happens. I also hear a lot about public safety and how our sheriff has not been quick to respond to many concerns in the unincorporated areas. I think it's time that we work with the sheriff to make sure that the expectation is that they are there and responding to those communities' needs as well.
Yeah, this has been one of the most enjoyable parts of this campaign, is reacquainting myself with a lot of these heritage communities in the Delta and in the unincorporated county. And I think the most important thing that they need is solid representation. They've had a good voice in Don Natoli and a good voice from Toby Johnson prior to that, but oftentimes Don and Toby would be voted down 4-1 on an issue that concerned South Sacramento County, District 5, because of the influence of downtown Sacramento politics intruding into the business of the Board of Supervisors. So what these communities need from their supervisor is a voice that can work with and stand up to the folks in Sacramento and make sure that they're represented adequately.
Pat, new research examines law enforcement stops, use of force and misconduct, and the racial disparities in police interactions. What will you do to address this as county supervisor?
Sure, that's a great question. And, law enforcement is not immune to a principle that I hold dear relative to leadership and organizations, and that is continuous improvement. And so there's always things that we can do better. Training, both for our sworn officers, and then also using professionals that have the education and background, as I mentioned, in de-escalation and in other, soft sciences, if you will, to take over once the threat of life has been secured. And so I think that there's a lot that we can do and we should continue to do, but I stand behind the men and women that suit up and go out into the community every day and put their lives on the lines, and my sympathies go out to the families of the crime victims, and so I think we can definitely improve, but we got to have the support for the law enforcement first.
Jacqueline?
I think we have an opportunity with the Inspector General position, whose responsibility is to be an independent voice in regards to the analysis of the Sheriff's Department and the policies and procedures that are in place. And in my opinion, I think we need to increase the authority of the Inspector General and work to hold the department accountable for common sense reforms and suggestions. We know that the sheriff is an elected position, and the sheriff is the person that determines priorities, policies, and procedures. And so I think it's only fair that we have a third party who is responsible for looking at the outsider's viewpoint. What other reforms can be made in order to keep our communities safe?
Jacqueline, the Sacramento grand jury accused county government of misusing COVID-19 relief funds. They determined the sheriff's office received most of the $181 million in federal relief, while a CARES Act funding plan was not drafted to support COVID relief services. What's your response to the grand jury's opinion?
The grand jury report was clear that there were deficiencies in how the county allocated their funding. Should I have been supervisor at the time, I would have advocated for more funding to go directly to the public health department, make sure that they have the resources they need to ensure vaccinations and education of the general public and keeping people safe. I would have advocated for more funding to small businesses. We lost so many small businesses during the pandemic, and I think that could have been avoided should we had money directly set aside, or more money directly set aside for small businesses. And I would have advocated for some of that funding to keep people directly in their homes. We saw an increase in homelessness over the pandemic, and I think that that could have been avoided should the Board of Supervisors have allocated funds directly toward that cause.
Pat?
Yeah, I think hindsight is always 20/20, and it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. But I think that the supervisors were responding to a very fluid situation, and there was plenty of mismanagement during the COVID pandemic, not just in the response to it, but also in how the funding was allocated. And I agree with some of the statements that were made relative to making sure that the money flowed out to the streets. I don't think that happened as much as it should have. The relief did not reach the people who needed it most. In every public agency board that I sit on, they came through the pandemic better than expected, and so their conservative projections were exceeded, and in fact had money coming down from the federal government that was really not necessary for that agency. So I'm not going to sit here in judgment of what the supervisors did do. I think the report speaks for itself, but I think that there was a lot of blame to go around in what a situation that was unprecedented.
Pat, the sheriff's office will have new leadership in January. What would you do to improve the relations between the sheriff's office and the communities in District 5?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a great relationship with the incoming sheriff, and I look forward to working with him. And I think that the first thing is a good line of communication with that office, and recognizing that the Board of Supervisors has oversight from a fiduciary standpoint and funding the budget, but that the sheriff is in charge of the department. So there are certainly things that I'm looking forward to do of how the sheriff's department can serve the South Sacramento County better, particularly in the Delta. We've heard some of those concerns of a lack of presence, and so I look forward to those conversations, but I think that it all starts with relationships, and I have a good relationship, and I look forward to building upon that relationship, and I think that it's also about the supervisor staying in their lane relative to what we have control over and what the sheriff has control over.
Jacqueline?
I'm encouraged by many of the comments that our new sheriff has made in regards to his desires to focus in on equity and implicit bias training for our sheriffs. I think more training is always better. I look forward to working with him in creating funding opportunities to make sure that that training can occur. I do think, in agreement with Mr. Hume, that communication and an open door policy is always needed. That's how I've always governed, and that's how I will govern as supervisor.
Jacqueline, in your campaigning in communities south of Elk Grove, what unique issues were raised by residents?
Communities south of Elk Grove, like Galt and the Delta, I'm assuming you're meaning.
You can include Elk Grove, too.
I can include Elk Grove, okay. I think depending on whether the community is incorporated or unincorporated, the issues change. Obviously, some core responsibilities of the supervisor in unincorporated areas have to do with public safety and transit and healthcare. And then in the incorporated areas, we need to work closely with regional leaders to ensure that there's no gaps in services for those that need access, such as homeless, foster youth, etc. So I think the needs vary based on whether or not the community is incorporated. That's what I've seen in talking to folks in the communities.
Pat?
Yeah, great question. And again, this has been the highlight of the campaign, is getting out into these small communities and talking with people. Look, the overarching thing that I've heard, what they're clamoring for, and this isn't to say that they haven't had it, but they want to make sure that it continues, is regional representation. They want somebody that's going to stand up for their interests, that's actually going to hear their concerns and bring them forward and fight for them. That's important to Galt, that's important to Wilton, it's important in the Delta. In addition to that, they're seeing roads crumbling under their tires. They're seeing a lack of response time when there's a crisis, an emergency, because the sheriffs are spread so thin. They're seeing illegal dumping, speeding, traffic, all of the things that some of the larger communities are experiencing. But whereas the larger communities have a easier network with which to manage these issues, a lot of these smaller communities are kind of left to their own devices, and they were completely reliant upon the county to make sure that we're taking care of them and they're getting a return for their investment by way of their taxes. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Pat. I wanted to mention, too, for both of you, if a question really needs a little more than a minute, you can ask for a little extra time.
Oh, now you tell us.
Yeah. Well, we didn't want you to do that on every question, or we wouldn't get through them all. The goal is to get through a lot of questions from voters. So, Pat, our county ballot will see Measure A, the transportation tax that includes a 40-year half-cent sales tax increase to raise millions for transportation and transit projects. Should Measure A be adopted? Why or why not?
Yeah, so I've been on the STA board and I've worked on the previous attempts to try and get an additional transportation sales tax adopted. We did make it to the ballot the first attempt and were narrowly defeated. And in the second attempt, there was some language inserted by the mayor of Sacramento that sort of derailed the whole process. And so it was decided not to even move it forward on the ballot. This tax will pay for some important transportation improvement projects. The reality is that the state and the feds aren't returning our money on a proportionate share from what we send off to them, and so we're looking at trying to pick that up locally and take responsibility on ourselves. But out of the $8.3 billion expenditure plan, $8.3 billion expenditure plan, 0.3 of it is earmarked for the Capital Southeast Connector, and yet everybody seems wrapped around the axle about that one project and willing to derail the whole thing over that. So it's up to the voters to decide. I think it's a bad time to be asking for a tax increase no matter what the use is, but I have fought for to bring in the taxes for these uses because I know that our infrastructure is important.
Jacqueline?
Written as is, the short answer is no, I do not support Measure A. I do believe that if we can guarantee that carbon will be mitigated due to the building of new roads, and we can guarantee that sprawl into our southeastern communities, our rural communities, will be avoided, then yes, I would support it. I'm encouraged by STA and SACOG's recent MOU that will provide 100% mitigation for the carbon due to the new roads built, but I do not know if that agreement will remain in place should voters determine that they would like this measure to be passed. Also, that doesn't include any guarantees that the development and sprawl won't impact our rural communities. So at this point, no, I do not support Measure A.
Jacqueline, we know the lack of affordable homes for purchase and rent is at crisis proportions across the state. What do you think you will be able to do to stimulate production, or the county be able to do to stimulate production of more affordable homes and rental stock?
Really great question. I have a 15-year-old child that is thinking about moving on after high school and wondering if they will be able to afford to live in this area. We have 68,000 single-family homes already in the pipeline here in Sacramento County. I believe that we need to shift our focus to a wider variety of housing being built, mixed-use development, transit-oriented development with a focus on infill, and an increase in the production of affordable housing. I think we do this through an inclusionary housing ordinance that I would support as supervisor. And like I already mentioned, the mixed-use housing and transit-oriented development. I want our graduates from college and trade schools to be able to afford to buy a home here. And I think we need to shift our focus.
Pat?
Yeah, coming from a background in this, I kind of know this fairly well. And what it comes down to is a simple supply and demand economics. And the more that the demand goes up and you constrain the supply, the more expensive it's going to be. So we need to build more housing stock across all styles of housing in order to catch up to that demand. The simple fact is that it's unfortunate from a political standpoint that people like to see their property values going up, which is typically inflated artificially. And so when you add more supply, that keeps the property values where they ought to be, which makes it more attainable for people trying to enter the market. So, the reality is that we just need to make some of the regulations and some of the issues that happen relative to CEQA and relative to stormwater prevention and relative to some of the plans that the state of California has put into place relative to Title 24, some of these things that are impediments to being able to put product in the ground and onto the market.
Pat, what services do you think the county can provide for immigrants and refugees to help them gain self-sufficiency? And would you be willing to meet regularly with immigrant communities to learn more about their concerns and needs? Why or why not?
Sure. So I'll answer the second part first. I'm willing to meet with anyone at any time in order to learn about their issues and understand their situation better. Relative to what specifically can be done, I have a rising tide mentality. I believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And so when you create a prosperous environment where people are able to conduct business and businesses are able to open, and you have made your processes streamlined and efficient and effective, and your government is acting in a way that is nimble and responsive and eager and starts with the mindset of how do I help you rather than here are the reasons why you can't do what you are asking me to do, then that creates an environment where everybody thrives a little bit more. And so I don't think that you need to specifically look at our refugee and immigrant community necessarily. You make everything easier for everyone, and that lifts all people up.
Jacqueline?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What services do you think the county can provide for immigrants and refugees to help them gain self-sufficiency? And would you be willing to meet regularly with immigrant communities to learn more about their concerns and needs? Why or why not?
The second part first, absolutely. I'm already doing that work. As a school psychologist, I meet with immigrant families and refugee families every week to talk about their needs and access to services and what they would benefit from. What I am hearing from those communities is they need more language access opportunities. They are missing out on applying for services because of the fact that we do not have materials in their language. I am also hearing that they want more workforce development opportunities, more education, more training, more opportunities for apprenticeships, not just in the trades, but in other professions as well. I'm encouraged by SCOE with their mental health apprenticeship opportunity where people can actually make money while they're working towards an advanced degree. And I want to advocate for those opportunities for our immigrant and refugees.
Jacqueline, as a county supervisor, is there anything that you can do to protect a woman's right to reproductive health care and abortion in Sacramento County?
This is a really important question. Women are under attack in this country. We are losing our right to bodily autonomy, and whoever is elected in any position in California or in the rest of the country, we need to make sure that person strongly advocates for a woman's right to choose and a woman's right over her own bodily autonomy. I am vocally pro-choice. I have been pro-choice for as long as I can remember, and when I'm elected supervisor, I will advocate for more services to increase women's reproductive access, not take it away. I do believe that the county is in a unique position to get this work done, as we have seen happen in other counties such as San Mateo and Santa Clara. We need to fight for this right, and I plan to do that as supervisor.
Pat?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. It's right in the wheelhouse for my opponent. The reality is this is not a County of Sacramento supervisor issue. It is settled law in California. It's going to be even more settled with the passage of Prop 1. And so it's not something that I believe is within the purview of a supervisor's race. And so I'm not going to focus any of my time on it. I'd rather talk about the important things that the voters are telling me relative to public safety, relative to cleaning up encampments, relative to creating a prosperous economy and the cost of inflation. It's not an issue for a Sacramento County supervisor.
Pat, do you believe climate change requires urgent action? If so, what will you do to reduce the carbon footprint of county activities significantly and quickly support natural carbon sequestration?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, and I've said this in a previous forum before, the problem with this discussion is we're focused on the wrong thing. And so I think you can sum up best practices with a couple of very simple truths. And that is that pollution is bad and that natural resources are finite. And so however we can act in a way to to reduce our pollution, be that emissions or be it actual, pollution and waste, as well as working to conserve our natural resources is good. And so there are things we're doing with LEED standards of buildings, and I just noticed on the way in here the grass that's up here on the second floor, just outside this building, and so there's green rooftops and geothermal HVAC systems. There's all kinds of great technologies and great things that are out there that we can be exploring to just be better people and look out for our planet, and I think that's what it comes down to.
Before I answer the climate question, I'd like to go back to something my opponent said about abortion access not being something relevant to the Board of Supervisors. It's 40 days before the election. 40 days. The fact that my opponent has not come out with his opinion on a woman's right to choose is not only problematic, but it's frankly angering. Over 50% of the population of this county can get pregnant and may need access to abortion services. It's time that my opponent be transparent about his thoughts around this issue. Now, to answer the climate change issue, I championed a climate action plan, the first of its kind for the Community Services District. I support SMUD's 2030 zero carbon effort. And as for the cap for Sac County, I do believe that's vague, it's watered down, and as supervisor, I will work to bring that back up for discussion so we can talk about how we can do due diligence and making sure that we are providing the community with mitigation on some of these climate issues.
Jacqueline, interpersonal gun violence is often concentrated in under-resourced neighborhoods where cycles of violence, injury, trauma, and retaliation have devastating effects. How would you address this?
You're absolutely right. Gun violence is on the rise. In fact, not in our community, but just in Oakland yesterday, there was yet another school shooting. It terrifies me to be a parent in this community and in this country, as we have seen with Uvalde, dozens of school children being slaughtered. We need to have more prevention programs in place. Research shows that when we fund programs that are intended to prevent these issues from happening, we have results. And as supervisor, I will advocate for more funding to go to gun violence prevention and violence prevention in general.
Pat?
Yeah, I agree that it's an issue, and I think that we need to figure out how to stop it before it starts, and a lot of that has to do with education, and a lot of it has to do with making sure that there are consequences to our actions. I think you can draw a direct correlation to the rampant increase in crime and making violent crimes misdemeanors. The fact that there are people out on the streets who, when they get put back out on the streets, commit these violent crimes is an issue, and we need to roll back legislation that has been put into place that is allowing for early release. We need to support our law enforcement, and then we need to make sure that our communities feel supported. But, you know, it's a shame that we focus so much on gun violence when fentanyl deaths kill more people in America every day or annually than gun violence and automobile accidents combined. So there's a lot of focus on this one issue, and it's an important issue, but I think it goes back to better law enforcement, better presence in the communities.
Okay, this is our final question. You were great. I mean, 1 minute. You were very concise because these answers were complicated some, so great job. So our last question is kind of a fun question before we go to closing remarks. In the historic town of Locke, there's a protest sign that reads, "Fix the Locke sidewalks. Call Supervisor Natoli." If you're elected, will you be able to help Locke's wish come true?
Is that me or is that Pat first? I'm first?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I forgot what order we were going in. I see that sign, and I often wonder how many phone calls Don Natoli gets about that exact issue because of that sign. Of course, if I'm elected supervisor, I'll work with the community to try to fix that issue. And even though I don't support Measure A, if Measure A is passed and if the voters approve it, we can use some of those funds to make sure that those sidewalks and the infrastructure is fixed in that community.
It's a great question, and it's very complicated, but I will say I'm sure Don Natoli prefers that sign over the sign that's on Grant Line Road that points him to the dump and other various things from his #1 fan. Locke, first of all, there's a Locke Community Association's a state heritage site, and so it becomes complicated as far as who is involved in funding the improvements to Locke and the hurdles that have to go through. But I think that the fact that people are complaining about the sidewalks is indicative of infrastructure in general in the Delta being neglected. And so I will work with all of the communities down there. Locke, which I've gone to Al's Place and the Chinese food restaurant on the corner since I was a kid. And it's a great little community. And so I'll work with all the communities in the Delta to try to make sure that their infrastructure is taken care of and that they have a supervisor that can be responsive and try and scare up money in every nook and cranny that I can.
So now it's time for closing remarks, and we'll begin with Pat. And I would say, since we got through these questions so fast, if you want to take a minute and a half instead of a minute for anything you might have missed, go ahead. Minute and a half.
Well, I appreciate that offer, but I had my thoughts put out ahead of time, so unless I just talk really slowly, I don't think I'll need to do a minute and a half. But this has been a great discussion, and I thank everyone for submitting their questions and for the time that people have put into this and the attention that we've paid to these issues. I think the distinction in this race is clear. I am the most qualified, experienced, and capable candidate in the field. That's why I've earned the support of Supervisor Don Natoli, retired Supervisors Jimmy Yee, Susan Peters, Roger Nilo, Roberta McGlashan, and Sandy Smoley. In addition, I've assembled the largest coalition of electeds from across the region and across the aisle. I am the only candidate ready to go to work for you on day one. My opponent's supporters have already begun making baseless and untrue, despicable allegations about me, stooping to fear-mongering rather than talking about the real-world issues facing the next supervisor. I denounce the claims that have been made, and I respect all people, and am running to represent and serve everyone in District 5 and all of Sacramento County. The voters deserve someone who will deliver results on the issues that matter most: safe neighborhoods, clean streets, and a compassionate plan to address homelessness, not someone looking to divide with cheap tactics. I've been in the public eye for over 2 decades and have served faithfully in an open and transparent manner. My opponent has scrubbed her digital footprint from almost the entire term of her only elected position. There is someone in this race being untruthful about who they are truly in order to win an election, but it isn't me. I hope you'll go to pathume.com to learn more about me and my positions, and most importantly, I hope to earn your vote on or before November 8th. Thank you.
Jacqueline Moreno.
Those are some pretty big claims here that are outright lies. I'm no idea where he came up with that information. However, voters are clear that social issues and values are important. If my opponent cannot even talk about the #1 issue in our country right now, which is a woman's right to choose, how will he be able to govern with transparency and accountability? Our supporters have been clear. They're tired of the status quo. We need a new voice, a new perspective. What we're doing right now is not working. I believe that my values more closely align with the values of those in District 5, not only because I believe it, but we have the data to show it. I believe that the vision of the county that I see is the vision of the county that District 5 voters want. We can do great work when we work together. My opponent talked about my supporters. I'd like to talk about his. My opponent is supported by Christian nationalists who do not believe that abortion is a woman's right, supported by folks who do not believe that marriage equality is something that we should have in this country by supporters who, after Roe fell, came out and said, now we're coming for California. We need to do better. This race is about values, and I have your shared values.
Well, that concludes our forum, and I want to thank both of you for running for office and also being here today to answer these questions from voters. I want to thank our timer there, Nancy Lapp, and the folks here at Metro Cable Television. Ballots for voters go out October 10th, and if you've moved or changed your signature, the last day to register or re-register is October 24th. And you can do this very easily online at registertovote.ca.gov. Then when you get your ballot, you can mail it in, you can put it in a secured drop box, like a county library that's close to you, or you can vote in person at a vote center. These drop boxes and vote center locations will be listed in the information that comes with your ballot. You can also find nonpartisan voter information on all the candidates, the propositions, and the local ballot measures at votersedge.org. votersedge.org. Now, you're a more informed voter if you watched this discussion and heard from these candidates that are running for Supervisor District 5. So we'll hope that you will pass on what you've learned today and know that a YouTube link for this forum will be available at lwvsacramento.org after October 5th, so that you can pass that around. Thank you so much, candidates, and thank you for listening. Good night.
Thank you.